One of the work zone mobility challenges is it's a very narrow road on State Highway 71. So you have your 12-foot lane and then a 1 to 2 foot shoulder. That's about all you have. So it's extremely narrow. So trying to get traffic down to one lane, go by our work zone, and then work with the potential pedestrians or bicyclists became a challenge. There just wasn't enough room to work through that. So what we had come up with was if we had a pedestrian or a bicyclist that we needed to get through, what we would do is use the TCS to follow them or basically guide them through the work zone in the closed area where it was safe to get them through to the point where we had to push them over onto the live traffic side, at which point traffic would be stopped to allow them to pass through that live traffic zone to make sure there was no conflict between a vehicle and a pedestrian or a vehicle and bicyclist. And then once they were safely past the work zone where we could push them back into the dead lane and have the TCS guide them through there, we would move it over and then allow traffic to pass. And then once they were outside the work zone, they just continued on normally. Luckily, it's a very rural area, so there are not very many pedestrians or bicyclists, but we did have the occasional bicyclist that was doing some type of cross country or across the state ride that was using our road. So we did have to work with them on that, but it worked out surprisingly well. There were really no issues with that. So with the 1 lane closure, luckily we only had 2 1 lane closures that were outside of working hours. And those were for the 2 bridges that are on the project that we were doing deck repairs on. So the actual 1 lane closure was only about 300 yards long, maybe 400 yards long on the bigger bridge. So we used traffic signals, temporary traffic signals, to allow that to handle traffic during non-working hours. And with the way the road was set up, the geometry, it was a straight line section. So you had eyesight for the other side of the bridge, the other signal. So a driver, if blew through the red light or whatever, the other driver would see and could avoid the incident as well. So that worked out really well in our favor, just great sight vision. So some anticipated issues was, one, the weather delay in the beginning really threw the whole construction project behind. We were not anticipating going to a 2-season project when we started the project. And just because of the weather, we ended up being a 2-season project. So challenges that came up with that was, at what point of the project do we draw the line in the sand and say, we're going to stop here and leave it for the winter and then come back in the spring? We have to determine where that line in the sand will be based off of road usability and safety. So at a certain point, we had to say this is enough construction progress for the year to allow this to safely operate through the wintertime, and CDOT maintenance will still be able to plow it and the road user can still use it. So some of the changes we had to make was working with the contractor to figure out where they were willing to stop, where CDOT was willing to stop to make a good product for the wintertime, as well as maintaining all of our traffic control devices through the wintertime. Luckily, we did not have 1 lane closure permanently operating during the wintertime. It was back to normal flow per se. So we were able to have minimal traffic control devices out during the winter, but we're still at construction, so it still works out. So you still have your road work ahead signs and all that different requirements to go along with that, as well as weekly, TCI inspections. We still had to follow all of the requirements. So that was a challenge to find additional funding for that, and as well as keeping signs up in a very windy climate in the wintertime. A lot of them blew down and was constant repair to keep them legible. I would say overall, it was mostly successful. As with anything, there are things I wish we could go back and redo. Hindsight is 2020. Some things I would have changed would be the length of the 1 lane closure, the work zone that we allowed them to have. It got a little too long for the contractor. They just had a hard time keeping up in order to finish that section for each day. So maybe just reeling them back a little bit would be helpful, as well as the amount of time that the FDR, the full depth reclamation, was exposed to the traffic. We allowed it to go longer than the spec just to ease construction and hopefully speed up construction. And that just led to some other issues with quality of the FDR that we ended up with, as well as additional complaints from motorists for the dust and the rough road. So I would change the length of the closures that we allowed to be a little bit shorter, as well as the length of time that we allowed the FDR to be open to the traffic and to the environment, I would shorten that back down to the spec requirement